Betrayal has many faces, but the worst one wears a smile, while it destroys your life piece by piece. Mine came wearing a $3,000 suit and sitting across a mahogany table in Family Court Division 4, where my ex-husband Marcus leaned back in his leather chair at exactly 2:15 p.m. and spoke the words that would trigger his own destruction. The fluorescent lights in Judge Patricia Morrison's courtroom buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across the faces of everyone who'd gathered to decide the fate of my 7-year-old daughter, Emma. Marcus sat there with his perfect posture and his perfectly practiced expression of concerned fatherhood, surrounded by an army of lawyers who charged more per hour than I made in a week. When he turned to look at me with those cold blue eyes and delivered his calculated cruelty, he had no idea that Judge Morrison was holding a document that would transform his moment of triumph into the beginning of his complete annihilation. "You'll never win, Rebecca," he said with quiet confidence, his voice just loud enough for his new wife Stephanie to hear and nod approvingly. "You should have taken the settlement when I offered it." But what Marcus didn't know was that I hadn't been fighting just for custody. I'd been fighting for justice. And justice, it turns out, sometimes comes in the form of federal evidence that's been sealed for 8 months, while the FBI built an airtight case against the man who'd spent 2 years making me believe I was losing my mind. Everything about the hearing had been going exactly according to Marcus's carefully orchestrated plan until Judge Morrison paused while reading through what should have been routine custody documents. Her eyebrows rose slightly, and she glanced up at Marcus with an expression I couldn't quite read. Marcus's attorney, the shark he'd hired specifically to destroy my credibility, suddenly looked less confident than he had all morning. I watched as Judge Morrison set aside the standard paperwork and reached for a sealed envelope that had been sitting on her desk since the hearing began. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly when he saw the first crack in his perfect facade. The judge's fingers moved deliberately as she broke the seal, and Marcus leaned forward in his chair for the first time all day. His new wife, Stephanie, who'd been radiating smug satisfaction since we'd entered the courtroom, shifted uncomfortably when she noticed the change in his body language. I knew something was about to happen that would shatter Marcus's confidence, but I had no idea that the next 10 minutes would expose not just his lies about our marriage, but a criminal conspiracy that reached into federal drug trafficking, prescription fraud, and a systematic campaign of psychological abuse that had nearly destroyed my sanity and my life. The document in Judge Morrison's hands wasn't supposed to exist according to Marcus's version of reality, but truth has a way of surviving even the most determined attempts to bury it. Let me introduce you to the players in this legal battlefield, because understanding who they were makes what happened next even more devastating. Marcus Jonathan Whitmore is 38 years old, and he's spent every one of those years perfecting the art of manipulation. On the surface, he's everything society expects from a successful man: pharmaceutical sales executive, 6-figure income, perfectly groomed appearance, and the kind of confident charm that makes people want to believe everything he says. His fatal flaw isn't just narcissism, it's his absolute conviction that he's smarter than everyone around him, including federal investigators. That arrogance was about to cost him his freedom, his fortune, and his future. Stephanie Chen Whitmore is 26, Marcus's new wife, and former pharmaceutical sales representative who worked under him when we were still married. She's beautiful, ambitious, and completely convinced that she won the prize when she stole Marcus from me. Her fatal flaw is her willingness to believe any lie that makes her feel special and chosen. She's about to learn that when Marcus tells you you're different from all his other victims, you're not special, you're just next in line. Judge Patricia Morrison is 52, a no-nonsense family court judge with 23 years on the bench and a reputation for cutting through legal theater to get to the truth. She's seen every manipulation tactic in the book, which makes her the perfect person to handle what's about to unfold. Her strength is her ability to remain completely calm while delivering justice, no matter how explosive the circumstances. And then there's me, Rebecca Marie Chen, though I'll be going back to my maiden name as soon as these proceedings are over. I'm 35, a former pharmaceutical regulatory specialist who gave up my career to raise Emma when Marcus convinced me that good mothers put family first. My fatal flaw used to be my desperate need to make everyone happy, to smooth over conflicts, to believe that if I just tried harder, things would work out. But 2 years of systematic gaslighting and emotional abuse taught me that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to stop trying to keep the peace and start fighting for the truth. Emma is 7 years old, brilliant and sweet and completely unaware that her father has spent the last 2 years using her as a weapon against me. She's not here today, thank God, because she doesn't need to witness her father's empire crumble. But everything I'm doing, every risk I've taken, every moment of this nightmare has been to protect her from growing up thinking that Marcus's version of love is normal or acceptable. Before I tell you what that sealed document contained and how it transformed a routine custody hearing into a federal crime scene, please subscribe and let me know in the comments, have you ever been in a situation where someone with power tried to convince you that your version of reality was wrong? Because what I'm about to share will show you that sometimes the most dangerous abusers are the ones who seem most credible to everyone else, and that fighting back is possible even when it seems hopeless. Let's continue with the moment Marcus's perfectly constructed lies started unraveling. The morning had started with Marcus's attorney, Richard Pemberton, systematically destroying my character with surgical precision. He'd presented email exchanges taken out of context, text messages that had been edited to remove Marcus's provocations, and a carefully curated collection of incidents that painted me as an unstable ex-wife consumed by jealousy and revenge. Your Honor, Pemberton had said with practiced sincerity, my client is genuinely concerned about his daughter's well-being. Miss Chen has made increasingly erratic accusations about Mr. Whitmore's professional conduct, accusations that have been thoroughly investigated and dismissed by his employer, Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Marcus had nodded solemnly, playing the role of the reluctant victim perfectly. I still care about Rebecca, he'd testified, his voice heavy with manufactured sadness. But I can't allow her instability to affect Emma's development. My wife Stephanie and I can provide the stable, loving environment Emma needs. Stephanie had squeezed his hand supportively, the picture of the caring stepmother, ready to save a child from her troubled biological mother. But I'd sat there through every lie, every twisted half-truth, every character assassination, because I knew what was coming. I'd known for 8 months, ever since the day FBI agent Sarah Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, had knocked on my door and asked if I'd be willing to help them build a case against my ex-husband. We know he's been using his pharmaceutical connections for illegal activities, Agent Chen had explained. We know he's been distributing controlled substances without proper prescriptions, using his company as a front for drug trafficking. What we need is someone who can help us understand his methods, his patterns, his psychology. I'd agreed without hesitation, not for revenge, but for Emma. Because the man who could systematically drug his wife to make her seem unstable, who could gaslight her into questioning her own sanity, who could use his own child as a weapon in his psychological warfare, that man was capable of anything. Judge Morrison looked up from the sealed document, her expression carefully neutral. Mr. Whitmore, she said slowly, I need to address some additional information that's been brought to the court's attention. Marcus's attorney immediately stood up. Your Honor, if there's new evidence being introduced, we should have been given the opportunity to review. Sit down, Mr. Pemberton. Judge Morrison's voice carried absolute authority. This isn't new evidence. This is federal evidence that's been unsealed as of this morning. The first flicker of uncertainty crossed Marcus's face. Stephanie was looking between Marcus and his attorney, confusion beginning to replace her earlier smugness. Mr. Whitmore, the judge continued, were you aware that the FBI has been investigating your business practices for the past 18 months? Marcus's carefully modulated voice came out slightly strained. Your Honor, my professional record has been thoroughly vetted by my employer. Your professional record, Judge Morrison interrupted, includes federal charges for drug trafficking, prescription fraud, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. The courtroom went dead silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, the buzz of the fluorescent lights, someone's sharp intake of breath from the gallery. Judge Morrison continued reading from the document. According to this federal investigation report, Mr. Whitmore has been operating a prescription fraud ring for the past 3 years, using his legitimate pharmaceutical sales position to gain access to controlled substances, which he then distributes through an illegal network. Marcus's attorney was frantically whispering to him, but Marcus looked like he'd been turned to stone. Furthermore, the judge said, the investigation reveals that Mr. Whitmore used his access to these substances to drug his then-wife Rebecca without her knowledge or consent, causing the exact erratic behavior he's citing as grounds for custody modification. Stephanie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She was staring at Marcus like she'd never seen him before. That's impossible, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Judge Morrison looked at him with something that might have been pity. Mr. Whitmore, the FBI has security camera footage of you accessing controlled pharmaceutical supplies without authorization. They have recorded conversations between you and Dr. Samuel Kellerman discussing distribution methods and dosage calculations. They have your personal financial records showing unexplained income of over $200,000 in the past year. The weight of his crimes was settling over the courtroom like a toxic cloud. But Judge Morrison wasn't finished reading. According to Agent Sarah Chen's report, the judge continued, Mr. Whitmore systematically administered unprescribed benzodiazepines to his wife over a period of 8 months, causing memory problems, anxiety attacks, and disorientation that he then documented and presented as evidence of her mental instability. The pieces of my nightmare were finally falling into place in front of witnesses. The confusion I'd felt during our last months together, the way I'd started doubting my own memory, the panic attacks that seemed to come from nowhere. Marcus had been poisoning me, then using my symptoms as proof that I was unfit to be a mother. You drugged me, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. Marcus turned to look at me, and for the first time in 2 years I saw panic in his eyes instead of calculated cruelty. Rebecca, you don't understand, he started, but Judge Morrison cut him off. Mr. Whitmore, I'm not finished reading. Her voice could have cut glass. The report also indicates that you plan to have your ex-wife committed to a psychiatric facility once you gained full custody of your daughter, using falsified medical records provided by Dr. Kellerman. Stephanie stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I can't listen to any more of this, she said, her voice shaking. Sit down, Mrs. Whitmore, Judge Morrison commanded. You're going to want to hear the rest of this because it directly concerns you. Stephanie slowly sat back down, her face pale with growing horror. According to Dr. Kellerman's confession, Judge Morrison continued, Mrs. Stephanie Whitmore was not an unknowing victim in this conspiracy. She actively participated in the drugging of Rebecca Chen, helped falsify medical records, and was promised a significant portion of the illegal profits in exchange for her cooperation. The courtroom erupted. Stephanie shot to her feet again, this time to protest. That's a lie! Marcus told me she was already taking medication for anxiety. Mrs. Whitmore, the judge's voice cut through her protests. Dr. Kellerman has provided recorded conversations where you discussed dosages and timing with your husband. You knew exactly what you were doing. I stared at Stephanie as the truth sank in. She hadn't been an innocent bystander who'd fallen for Marcus's charm. She'd been an active participant in the systematic destruction of my sanity and my relationship with my daughter. But there's more, Judge Morrison said, and I couldn't imagine what could be worse than what I'd already heard. Mr. Whitmore, the judge said, her voice taking on an almost clinical tone. Were you aware that your ex-wife has been working undercover with the FBI for the past 8 months? The silence that followed was so complete it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Marcus's face went through several emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, a rage so pure it made me instinctively lean away from him. According to Agent Chen's report, Mrs. Rebecca Chen contacted the FBI when she began to suspect she was being drugged. She agreed to wear recording devices during interactions with you and Dr. Kellerman. She provided handwriting samples to verify forged prescriptions. She documented every instance of illegal activity she witnessed or experienced. Marcus was staring at me like I was a complete stranger. You've been recording our conversations? Every single one, I confirmed, my voice steady for the first time in years. Every threat, every manipulation, every time you told me I was crazy for suspecting what you were doing to me. Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Mrs. Chen also provided access to your personal computer and financial records, which led to the discovery of additional criminal activities, including money laundering and tax evasion. Marcus's attorney was packing his briefcase with obvious disgust. He clearly hadn't signed up to represent someone facing federal charges this serious. Finally, Judge Morrison said, I have here arrest warrants for both Mr. Whitmore and Mrs. Whitmore to be executed immediately upon the conclusion of these proceedings. The final emotional beat was something I hadn't expected: freedom, not just legal victory, but the deep psychological freedom that comes from knowing you weren't crazy, you weren't wrong, you weren't the problem. Federal agents entered the courtroom as Judge Morrison finished reading the charges. Marcus and Stephanie were both cuffed and read their rights, while the judge continued with the custody ruling. Mrs. Chen, Judge Morrison said, you are hereby granted sole physical and legal custody of Emma Chen Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore's parental rights are suspended pending the outcome of federal criminal proceedings. All marital assets currently frozen in the federal investigation will be released to you as the innocent spouse. Marcus turned to me one last time as the agents prepared to lead him away. You have no idea what you've done, he said, his voice filled with a kind of cold fury I'd learned to fear during our marriage. I know exactly what I've done, I replied. I've protected our daughter from growing up, thinking that what you call love is normal. The agents led them both away, Marcus still trying to maintain some dignity, Stephanie sobbing and calling for her own attorney. The courtroom slowly emptied until it was just me, my attorney, and Judge Morrison. Mrs. Chen, the judge said as she gathered her papers, I want you to know that what you did took tremendous courage. A lot of people in your situation would have been too scared to fight back. I wasn't fighting for myself, I told her. I was fighting for Emma's future. Sometimes the person who systematically destroys your reality is actually giving you the evidence you need to rebuild your life stronger than before, but healing only begins when you're brave enough to trust your own truth over someone else's lies. Marcus was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison on multiple charges. Stephanie received 8 years and testified against him in exchange for a plea deal. Dr. Kellerman got 12 years and lost his medical license permanently. The investigation led to the exposure of a much larger prescription fraud ring that had been operating for over a decade. Emma and I moved across the country, where I used my pharmaceutical background and my experience with federal investigations to start a consulting firm that helps law enforcement agencies understand complex prescription fraud cases. Emma started therapy to help her process the trauma of our situation. She's thriving in ways I never thought possible when we were trapped in Marcus's psychological prison. If someone in your life is trying to convince you that your memories are wrong, that your perceptions are faulty, that you're being too sensitive or overreacting to things that feel serious to you, document everything. Trust your instincts. Reach out to professionals who can help you determine whether what you're experiencing is normal relationship conflict or systematic abuse. And remember that the most dangerous abusers are often the ones who seem most reasonable to everyone else. Subscribe if this story reminds you that justice is possible even when it seems hopeless. And comment below, have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to make you question your own reality? Because gaslighting is one of the most insidious forms of abuse, and recognizing it is the first step toward freedom. Marcus had been right about one thing. I never could have won by playing his game according to his rules, but I didn't need to play his game. I just needed to change the playing field entirely and let the truth speak for itself. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting free and making sure they can't hurt anyone else the way they hurt you.